So welcome everybody. I'm just watching the participants list with one eye and going on with this presentation with the other. So plan is for me to put up share my screen and I have a series of slides, and then I'll present presentation. It'll probably be 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. If you do have a burning question that you don't want to wait till the end, then just unmute yourself and say, I have a question, and then we can proceed, but there'll be time at the end. So let me start. I'll get my share screen going here. Okay. There, we're good. So this is presentation is covering a series of topics. I'm starting with some basics, things you probably already know, but just some basics, and through to some of the regulations in Canada, and then spend the majority of our time talking about the reimbursement process and tools that you have. Now, in the top right-hand corner here, this is the FDA's regulatory model out of the US. As you can see, it's a concept to obsolescence. So it's a life cycle model, which they've always used in the US. Canada has recently committed to using the same concept. So they'll be doing pre-approvals, the ongoing monitoring, the post-market activities, all those things. So let me get into this thing.
Sorry, Stephen, just to let you know, the presentation is not in full view or full screen mode.
Okay, let me stop presentation and try it again. How's that?
Oh yeah, perfect, thank you.
Okay, so back here, this is where we are. So these are the topics we'll be going through today, and we'll start here. So you got the healthcare system. I'm going to minimize this so I can see it better. There we are. So the spend in 2019 was $264 billion, 70% private, 70% public, 30% private. So we've got 7,068 per person, or 11.6% of our GDP. This is CI-HI data. If you're looking for health spending information or health trends, CI-HI data is always very, very useful. So 11.6% of GDP. We're in the top probably 8 countries with spend. Of course, the US is just the outlier, way up there around 17, 18%. The top tiers are all around 10 to 12%. Canada has always been there. So it's a public system, and it's a national publicly funded healthcare system. 10 provinces, 3 territories. And another important component, which people don't come to think about when we're doing reimbursement, is federal insurance programs. So if you look at the number of people covered by these jurisdictions, the federal insurance program comes in third behind Ontario and Quebec. And so that's primarily because they're responsible for the Indigenous population in Canada. So big population, and that's their role. So next goes down to the number of hospitals and physicians. So I'm just a technicality here, but I can't see the participation list anymore. So I can't see if there's anybody waiting. Let me go back up. Oh well. Well, I guess if they didn't make it 5, they're not going to make it. Okay, so let's continue. So
I think, Stephen, people will be able to join automatically. You don't have to admit them in the call.
Okay, thanks. So this is the healthcare system. But really, it's our Medicare system is really a hospital and doctor medical program. It pays for hospital visits and it pays for physician visits, and that's the sort of approximate numbers that they were in those respective years. The private system is at 30%, so it's about $80 billion, and it's insurance plans and cash or out of pocket. And this is prescription drugs, dentistry, physical therapy, vision care, medical devices outside of hospitals. If you get a prescription drug inside a hospital or you get a medical device inside a hospital, it's covered by the health system. At the bottom here, you can see that of that 80 billion, 41% is paid through insurance and almost 50% is paid by cash. So this is where the money goes. So this is 2019. The hospitals have the largest amount, and you can see the percentages of health spending per person, and then the growth. It's covered for drugs, and it's also lays out the physicians. Drugs 15 years ago were probably less than 10%. So it's been creeping, but in the last probably 4 years, it's kind of leveled off. But overall, there's growth in the system. So that's where the money goes. Now this slide is old, so it's I found it for 2013. But of the total health spending in 2013, this chart has by country the highest percent of total spend, and you can see where Canada lies near the end, with not nearly the spend that other countries have. And then if you do the math on what it works out to, it's about $7 billion, $7.4 billion on devices in Canada. So that just gives you some context around that. So the industry in Canada, market size is about $11 billion. It's the top 10 market, but still it's only 2% of the global market. The global market is, forecast to be over 300 billion in 3 years. So we're still an important market for the industry because it's a top 10 market. And so companies will want to try to access the Canadian marketplace. Here's a point. We import 80% of the medical devices that we use in Canada. And this recently became a significant issue when we had our shortfalls in PPE and ventilators and lack of vaccine research. And so it's a point. I'll make a couple other points on that a little later, but it's something which hopefully will get changed. So as the U.S. and the otherwise reverse, they export 80% of what they manufacture. This is the employees. It's not nearly as big as the other large industries, but still a significant presence. Most of the companies are Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises. However, and 75 to 80% of the market is Ontario and Quebec, which is important to take into account when you're looking to build a reimbursement strategy about where you want to focus to begin with. On that percentage of Canadian SMEs, that's the number of countries. But if you look at market shares, it's a 10% of the companies. In other words, the global companies that have 85 to 90% of the share. All right. Now we're getting into the actual process for getting a product to market. I've outlined 5 hurdles. The first 3 are Health Canada requirements, safety, quality, efficacy. That's what they require to give a medical device a license. And the final 2 are value and health technology assessment outcome that the payers are interested in before there's reimbursement. So these are the 5 hurdles. We'll go through these. So we'll spend a few slides on the regulations. It's important to have a basic understanding of the medical device regulations in Canada. So it's under the Food and Drug Act. Health Canada is responsible for the primary reason for protect the safety of Canadians. And you got the Health Products and Review Branch, and then a Medical Devices Directorate. This directorate is relatively new. It was created about a year ago. Before, it was a bureau under the Therapeutics Directorate, which meant that drugs ruled, but they recently made it its own directive. And you see the departments that are underneath that directive. This is just the Health Canada website. So that's the directorate. They're the ones responsible for authorizing and reviewing and authorizing medical devices for the market in Canada. So when you talk about the regulations, it covers the manufacturing, the advertising for sale, and the sale of a medical device. It includes the importation of a medical device for sale or use on individuals other than importation for personal use. So Canada operates under a risk-based classification system or progressive system. Sorry, I lost you there. And the indicators that are used to determine the risk are listed at the bottom of the slide. And next slide will give some examples. So these are class 3, class 2, 3, and 4 devices, which require a medical device license, and class 1, which is the lowest risk. The company requires a license to sell the product, but the individual devices do not have a medical device license themselves. However, the products in class 2, 3, and 4, they do require a license. And the review process and the materials that Health Canada needs to review to make a decision, authorization or not authorization. This is class 2 is mainly an administrative review. In other words, have you checked all the boxes in the application process? The class 3, you need to certify and mention what evidence you have and list studies, name the studies. And then in class 4, you need to submit all the information, the detail to the regulator. All right, and just a couple slides on COVID. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you all know, I won't go into it too much, but Health Canada has responded to the pressures. The demand that we had for health products for our healthcare frontline workers and people in general was just not going to be met with the current process. So Minister of Health signed an interim order in mid-March to expedite and to sort of bypass the regulatory process and when need was identified. So this is what they're put. This is their slides, by the way, from just 2 weeks ago. So the first order, or first part of the order, covered the expedited authorization, which means that they just reviewed the devices faster. An abbreviated application, there weren't any fees, and has a bit of a risk that they had to go back and recall a couple of products because once they got to market, they had some issues. The second part was where you can get a product that's meets our regulatory requirements in another jurisdiction, and what Health Canada call a trusted regulator. So some of the jurisdictions. So if you had a device that was authorized for the US or for the UK or for Australia, and it was required in Canada, they use this way to get it in. This just tells you what they've sort of done. So as of October 5th, the number of devices that they authorized, and then special access programs. I'll go a little more detail on what special access means. And then 11 related investigational testing authorizations. And that's basically, that's a clinical trial. It's just medical device talk for a clinical trial. All right, I thought I'd include this because a year ago, this wasn't there. They were been working on it for a while. Now, Health Canada is really provided the guidance and the structure to look at digital health as a medical device. So SAMD is software as a medical device. And then you can go around the circles and see which other ones are covered in there. And as you all know, the last 8 months have been huge for the digital technologies and digital health industries. It's advanced probably 15 years in 8 months. And so that's a good thing for all of us, I think, and for the technology and patient care. So basically, digital health technology will be considered a medical device if it does what a medical device does. That is, it treats, diagnoses, mitigates, et cetera. So if it's covers under the same definition, Health Canada's definition for a medical device, it's covered. Okay. Now we're going to get into more on the reimbursement piece. So there'll be some basics, talk about procurement, discuss the payers. Excuse me, I just had a little drink of water there. Reimbursement strategy. So the basics. So whenever I speak with a company about developing about reimbursement, one of the biggest mistakes companies make is they don't start early enough. They wait until the product is at a stage where it's almost ready to commercialize, and they haven't done any work on reimbursement. So start early. Like, I mean, early as in same time you start considering your regulatory pathway or your regulatory needs to get your authorization for the market. Look at reimbursement as well. So in other words, very early on, you might get buy-in to get a little bit of budget from the budget holders so that you can get some help. Because if you're a small company and you're not going to have a lot of expertise, so you'll want to reach out to someone who does have expertise, can do a bit of a plan, not a detailed, big plan, just maybe a 1 or 2 page sort of playbook that you'll be able to follow and build out as you go on. You need to commit for evidence development. So the economic endpoints are as important now as the clinical endpoints. 20 years ago, that was not the case for medical devices. It was for pharmaceuticals, but not devices. But now it pretty much is. So you need to get that economic data. Then do a reimbursement assessment and mapping. And I'll cover that a little bit later. Then build a basic plan, that sort of 2-pager with timelines and metrics. So procurement of devices. So buying medical devices. There's 2 primary methods that a device is purchased. The first is through a request for proposal or tender. It's where health organizations solicit bids for the purchase of medical devices. These devices are usually commodities. And I've got GPOs there, group purchasing organizations. I'll go into a little bit more detail on those groups in a couple slides. So tenders and then single source. So when there's a bunch of competitors, if you think about, syringes and commodity devices, it's going to be going to tender, and they're going to select the product based on price. Single source procurement is where you've got a technology that's innovative or potentially disruptive, and has a unique medical device features for their organization. So there's nobody else out there that has it, or if there is, maybe 1 or 2. So that's where the single source goes in. So here's the payers, very busy slide, but it's the payers of medical devices. So start at the top in the big red box, it's the health systems. And by health systems, I mean hospitals, regional health authorities, and group purchasing organizations. So these are the groups that represent health systems. They purchase 70% of all medical devices. So that's by far the biggest market. where they're purchased and used. Other buyers, though, depends on your device. You need to understand who the buyer is, which is why this slide is here for consideration. Maybe your product isn't meant for the health system. Maybe it's meant for something simple as an early insulin pump were not health system devices, they're insurance payer devices. So the insurers will pay for medical devices as well. Basically, if an insurance company pays for a pharmaceutical, they will also cover a medical device if it's if they're provided the evidence and the rationale for why it should be paid for. There are government direct programs, primarily around home care and home aids. And Ontario has the Assisted Devices Program, ADP, which helps cover the cost of medical devices such as wheelchairs and ventilator pumps for asthmatics, et cetera. And lastly, there's consumers, where patients and family. At the bottom there, those last 4 boxes are special boxes I mentioned earlier. Federal program, hospital foundations. So federal programs I mentioned, indigenous population, the military, veterans, federal prisons, RCMP are all covered under federal programs. Hospital foundations will pay for medical devices. Primarily, their focus is on capital equipment. So your robots, CT scans, MRIs, that type of device. Special access program. Now that's a program that Health Canada has, and it's sort of part 2 of that interim order I've mentioned. If a physician has a patient that they require, she requires, or she feels that patient would benefit from a device that's not available in the Canadian marketplace, they can apply to Health Canada for special access. And it's a very fast turnaround because sometimes it's urgent. And so a physician can apply and in some cases get a response in a couple hours to say, yes, you can bring this product into Canada and buy it for your patient. So special access. And the last one is clinical trials, or again, investigational testing for the technical term for devices. So they'll also purchase trials. But the main 4 payers are health systems, insurers, consumers, and government direct. All right. So a little bit more on the hospitals. You'll know this, but nonprofit, mostly nonprofit. I believe there are still 4 for-profit hospitals in the province of Ontario, but they're pretty much handcuffed. They can't move, they can't grow, they can't be passed down, but they're still there. Gradually moving away from global budgets where they just got one big massive budget and they could figure out what they wanted to do. And then a fee for service. So they're moving slowly to a quality-based procedures system where they want to pay for quality. And the idea there is that if I go in and get a knee replacement, and then I have to, as the institution and the healthcare providers, back that up with quality statements. And if that patient gets an infection or something happens to that device, then there's no more funding for that care. You just have the institution has to absorb it themselves. So you see this, it's going slow. It'll be 20 years, but they've got about half a dozen or so different procedures that are covered under this. Also in an institution, you need a clinical champion and evidence, of course. But yeah, in the past, again, 20 years ago, the clinician had the power to say, I need this device. I want this device for my patients, and let's just buy it. Well, that's changed, and now it's a team buying approach where there's finance there's materials management, procurement. There's other clinical, other professions in on the team that decides what is purchased. However, it's important to understand that you need to communicate with the clinician community because they still have the power of no, which means that if the clinician does not believe the device is safe and they say so, you're done. So you can't, you still have to spend time with all these stakeholders to get your messaging up there. Then spending and budget controls will have an effect on adoption, but budgets have kind of gone by the wayside at the moment. So here's a little more on regional health authorities, group purchasing organizations, and shared service organizations. So they become very prominent. And their role is basic, it's simple. Their job is to save their members, which are hospitals, money. So you'll get a group of hospitals joining together, either told to or voluntarily get together and use their group purchasing power to try to get the best price possible for the device. And the primary focus is on commodities and medical equipment. However, they are moving towards specialty. So they've tried to do tenders for orthopedics. They've tried to do tenders for intraocular lenses and other implants. So they use an RFP and they use tendering, and they also use bundling. So bundling occurs is when if I'm a hospital and I say, well, I need several items. Say I need syringes, I need gowns, I need masks, I need gloves. So I'm going to bundle all that technology and then send that out to tender to see what comes back. And then the companies will bid for the business. So this got to the point where there was very few channels available for innovative or disruptive medical devices. There just wasn't a way to get them into the market, to the patient. Although some of the provinces now have introduced programs to try to allow those products to get in. But so here's the other piece, health technology assessments. Okay, it's a systematic review of the evidence, and it's broader than Health Canada. Health Canada is safety, efficacy, and quality. And HTA considers other aspects, the clinical benefit, which is the efficacy, the economic impact, organizational, social, legal, ethical impacts for medical technology. So it's not pure science. It's societal issues coming into play in a health technology assessment. It is used increasingly in payer and buyer reimbursement decisions. And what will happen is that if you have a high price technology or a technology that is going to have a high volume and therefore create a large budget impact, then that could be flagged by a payer to say, you know what, we need to have an assessment to see whether or not there's enough value in this technology for us to spend our money on it. And then there are several layers of agencies that have that do HTA. So CADTH is a Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, and they're federal. Provincial, so Ontario has the Health Quality Ontario, and it's an Ontario Health Technology Review Committee. Alberta has one, Quebec has one, BC has one. Also down to regional hospital base. I know several hospitals in Toronto and here in London, where I'm living now, have HTA agency capabilities. So this is where they do an assessment, and then at the end of the day, the agency says, yes, it provides value, no, it doesn't provide value, or we're not sure. So some reimbursement challenges to consider when you're looking at it. Like I said, early, start it. It's a good way to think about it is when you start talking about regulatory strategy, talk about reimbursement strategy. All right? Budgets, fragmented marketplace. You've got multiple buyers. If you're selling to individual hospitals, there's a ton of hospitals in this country. And so it's a lot of work, a lot of legwork. So it's pretty fragmented. And the process for purchasing devices is unique for each device and market. What that means, so way back when drug-eluting stents came to the market and they were introduced to each province, no two provinces purchased the device the same way. It was either a different department, the hospital purchased it, but a different way in each province. So it's unique. Fee codes are important because if there's no fee code for remote monitoring, the physicians aren't going to do it. And then life cycles of medical devices are usually shorter, especially for innovative technologies. 18 to 24 months is all you really have. And at the HTA, there's no guarantee. Ontario could say, OTAX should say, yeah, we recommend this be publicly funded, but that doesn't mean it's going to be. So 3 key questions here. Does it work? Does it provide value? And can we afford it? The last one is a Canadian question. That's not always in a lot of jurisdictions. So you're developing a reimbursement pathway. So there's 3 components that I've developed for a reimbursement pathway. So it's the assessment, it's the plan, and it's the plan execution. Just gonna take a sip again. Okay, the assessment is where you cover off, you look at 2 aspects of it. There'll be an assessment, which is device assessment and the healthcare landscape. And we'll get into this in a moment. The second is the reimbursement plan. So what are the steps? What's your process? It's not really a process map, but it's similar to it in that you got to outline the steps and what tactics are you going to use to build your plan. And the third part is plan execution, because if you don't resource the execution of the plan, then you're not going to sell your product. And as a consultant, I've done reimbursement plans for a few companies where I go back to them a year and a half, 2 years later, and say, how's it going? And well, we haven't done it. Why not? We don't have the money to be able to execute the plan. Well, you need to understand that from the very beginning, or else you're just wasting your time. So can I get into some of the details on an assessment? So what I've done here, so under the assessment, I looked at device factors and I also mentioned landscape. So you need to answer questions such as these. What's the class of the medical device? What's the indication or the health claim? Every medical device that has a license has an indication and a health claim. So what does your device do to someone's health? What is your claim? Is there a need from a clinical perspective? Is it new, novel, or is it me too? Support clinicians. So that these are a series of questions that you go through, and I have a template which I'll send off to Ahmed, and he can share that with you. And it's just basically a list of these questions that you can use and you can share. I don't mind. The intention is to try to help folks get their products to market, and I don't have any need to keep everything to myself. So fee codes. I mentioned remote cardiac monitoring. So that's been in the market for probably 15, maybe 20 years now. For the first 5 or 6 years, it struggled because there wasn't a fee code for a physician to get paid to do remote cardiac monitoring. And so they didn't do it. So, and of course, in the last 8 months, especially early on, the first 2 months, that all changed because the government automatically introduced a series of fee codes for telemedicine, Zoom, physician visits, phone call visits, conference calls. They all started being covered, and the government said, okay, this is only for 1 year, but it's not 1 year. That'll be new normal. All those areas will be out there, and there's no pulling it back now. So we need the evidence. What kind of evidence? And I'd say the grade is an evidence term which says, what's the quality of the evidence? The lowest quality of the evidence, I would suggest, is a company saying, oh yeah, this is great technology, it really does this. That's not really evidence. The next one up is even physician opinion. That's not evidence either. The evidence grade goes up through the different observational studies, right up through to a double-blind or random controlled trial, which are kind of hard in medical devices. It's hard to do a blinded trial with a medical device. But you want the highest quality grade of your evidence. So what is that? Other questions to answer or to ask and get answers for. So what's the output from a health economic review? So in other words, quality adjusted life year. Payers, governments continue to insist that they don't use a threshold, a quality threshold when making a decision. Only I sat on the Ontario committee for 9 years, and they certainly do. They do use it, and the amount for both pharmaceuticals and devices is about $50,000 per year. If it's under that, great. And the challenge with that, of course, is if you have a rare technology or technology to treat a rare disease, you're not going to get a quality that's less than $1 million. And so these types of things have to be tossed out. But you want to know what the impact is. What's the budget impact? How much is this going to cost the system? And not just to purchase it, but there's life cycle costs that you need to build into this answer. So in other words, if you're selling a new MRI and it requires a new room and training for the clinicians and the technicians, that's a cost that's also needs to be included and understand, because it's going to be, someone's going to come back and ask the question. And you have to have the value proposition what is the value proposition? So it's almost like, your elevator pitch for your device. You need a value dossier. What's the dossier? What's the clinical evidence? What's the economic evidence? And it's a big, electronic file now. It's not a binder anymore. It's an electronic file that has all the evidence that you can gather in one place that can be used to make your argument. Then what's the benefit? Is it better, cheaper, or both? Obviously, both is the best. Does it eliminate a payer's pain point? And this pain point can vary across different payers. It can be the fact that the wait list at a certain hospital for a certain procedure has caught the attention of the media, and therefore it's become a pain point. So they're going to put more money into buying technologies. A government, I won't use a government example, it's fine. I mentioned life cycle costs. Again, technology, training, skilled work. So once you've done the device, then you want to look at the healthcare landscape. You want to look at who are the buyers, who are the payers, who are the users, and what information do they need. So, and to do this, you need to go out and ask them. So you can't sit back and just say, oh, well, we think this and we think that and we think this. No, you need to go speak to these individuals, the payers, the buyers, and the users, to see what their needs are and to get their feedback on your technology as you're bringing it to market, not once you've got it ready for market, because then it's too late. So is there a well-developed single approval process? How transparent is it? Some, like Quebec, some of the processes are just black holes. It goes in and you have no idea what happens. HTA is going to be used. Now HTAs, they can't do an HTA for every device. So in Canada, there are probably 3,000 medical devices, either newer or updated devices coming out of Health Canada each year. Now the vast majority of those are class 2 devices. Only about 5% would be class 4 devices. So only about 150 or so class 4 devices. But even 150, it's kind of hard to do with health technology assessment on 150 technologies. So they'll select which ones they want to use in assessment. So you need to know whether or not assessment is going to be used on yours, because you'll need to provide input to it and understand what the implications are. Medical device myopia, that's what I said earlier around companies sticking to what it thinks, what it believes, without opening its eyes wider to stakeholders and users to get their opinion. So we get that feedback. Patient advocates. Not too many patient advocates in the medical devices industry, although there's been some cases where there was. This is more of a pharmaceutical thing, which companies will get patient advocate groups to lobby on their behalf. Landscape again. So there's a decision based on cost or value. And value-based procurement is gaining some traction, but cost is still the primary motivator. Value-based means that, yeah, the device may cost dollar-wise a little more, but the total value received from the patients, whether it be lower length of stay, better quality of life, better chances of success, takes into not just the price. Is it a tender? Is it going to be a GPO? SSOs, by the way, are shared service organizations. They're unique to Ontario. There's 9 of them in the province, and these are just mini GPOs that buy for groups of hospitals in Ontario. So is there a tender or not? That depends on how you approach it. So how are decisions made? Who makes them? Who answers them? What are the determinants? And what's the timeline? So you need to understand all of these questions around the landscape. So once you've done the assessment and you have those questions and more, and you have that information available to you, now you can say, okay, I've got the basics questions answered. I got a sense of my path. Now let's chart it out. So the way I suggest people go here is you start with a simple map, and this is just an example. This can get blown out into easy 20, 30 pages. So how does the patient get the device? Right? So simple question, how do they get it? Who pays for it? Who buys for it? So sometimes the payer and the buyer are the same, or sometimes they're different. So for example, if a hospital is buying it, the payer is the province. However, if you're a clinic, you could be the buyer or the payer and the buyer, because you're buying a device for your clinic. So you need to understand who they are. And then is it a capital or operating budget? So there are dollar limits. Way back when it was 25,000, I'm not sure what it is now. I've been away from hospital procurement for a while. What's the procurement method? How are they going to do it? Is this going to be a single source purchase, or I can spend most of my time with the clinicians and get their buy-in, or is this going to be a tendering where I have to put the best bid I possibly can together to try to get it? And then who decides? Is it not usually one person? Is it a committee? Who on the committee? What are the inputs? So what are they looking for to make that decision? And you need to understand those and build those in to your plan. And who are the influencers? So who can say, you know what, this is a good technology, this provides value, I think we should go for it. So then you look at the company and say, what do you need? Right? You need a medical device license from Health Canada to sell and advertise. You need a sales force, maybe an account manager, depends how you're structured and what market you're in. Then what evidence does the company need? You need the clinical, economic, and then the HTA piece. So this is a quick slide on execution. So you need access to resources, expertise, experience, knowledge, demonstrated success, and you need a budget to pay for that. So you need an organizational capacity. You don't need a big organizational capacity if it's just a small company with one technology, but you do need the knowledge. Now, I I put it performance management. That's more for larger companies. It really has to do with measuring sort of how long it takes to get reimbursed. What other primary customers have you targeted, and were you successful, et cetera. So, and then some of the influencing factors, evidence, champions, medical society guideline. I mean, if you can get a guideline out of a physician group, that's endorsement useful. Key opinion leaders, we do that all the time. Like the person who did the lead on the investigation or the clinical trial will be most knowledgeable and good promoter of the technology. Lobbying by patients groups, not too much. Lobbying by industry, again, mostly ignored, but still important. And lobbying by clinicians to get the funding. So these are unique tactics. I'll just go through them briefly. I mentioned them earlier before. The special access program, coverage with evidence. That means that they did an HTA and we think it might be good, but we're not quite sure. So we're going to cover it, but we need to have evidence development keep coming into us to reassure us that we made the right decision. And we talked about the insurance foundations. The last two are very, very minor. So this is a slide I swiped out of the European Medical Device Industry Association. I like it because it lays out medical devices throughout a life cycle. I think I'm up there with that guy with the scarf. That's where I'm heading towards next. And but I thought it was just an interesting slide to look at. All right, so thank you very much.